Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition of Point of View, and for about half an hour here, we're going to spend some time talking about this conference that is taking place called 9/11 and the New Middle East Conference. And we wanted to do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, you can actually participate in that if you happen to be located where it is taking place, but in most cases, you can watch it online. It involves a number of individuals that we are interviewing. As a matter of fact, next week we have Michael Rydelnik with us. We also have Joel Rosenberg. They are two of the speakers, and of course the person that we're talking with right now is also one of the other speakers, Mitch Glaser. He is, again, Dr. Glaser is the president of Chosen People Ministries. He has written widely on Jewish evangelism, Messianic Judaism, 4 academic volumes published by Kriegel Publications, PhD from Fuller Theological Seminary, and joins us now by phone. So, Mitch Glaser, thank you for joining us once again on Point of View.
Hi, Kerby. Nice to be with you today.
Of course, one of the other reasons we want to talk about that is we're coming up to the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and the conference that you're doing will be something which I think will be so important in terms of honoring those individuals who lost their lives, remembering what happened, and then also exploring the implications for Israel and the United States, because we do have kind of a new Middle East. And next week we'll be talking with Joel Rosenberg about his book, Enemies and Allies, but I know he'll be speaking for you as well. And it seems to me that you have a number of different things you want to accomplish at the conference. So kind of give us an overview, if you might.
Sure, Kerby. And we also have Darrell Bach speaking. We also have Marty Getz, Messianic musician, and his daughter, Misha. And we've actually written, I co-wrote it with Marty, I used to write more, but now finally wrote a song again, probably after 15, 20 years. And so this song is a hymn. It's a hymn honoring the memory of those we lost in 9/11, and it's a hymn of hope. Wow. And I think that that's maybe the core of the conference, is not just instruction, not just inspiration, not just great Bible teaching from and great insights into the Middle East. We also have Anne Graham Lotz coming as well. But I think it's a matter of giving hope to people. And little did we know, of course, Kerby, that what would happen in Afghanistan. And so we actually have a soldier who did 2 or 3 tours of duty, lengthy tours of duty, because he was involved with the reconstruction of Afghanistan post 9/11. And he's going to give his testimony. He's a wonderful believer. He's going to give his testimony of how he sees that what he did, what he sacrificed, and what others sacrificed was good for the Afghanis, and of course, from his perspective, very good for the gospel as well. And so that's a big part of the program. We start Friday night with saying the prayer, mourner's prayer, called the Kaddish, holy, from Kadosh. And then Marty will sing, and Anne Graham Lotz will focus us on the nature of the gospel. Then all day Saturday, we will have our variety of speakers, and we mix it up between those who are on the ground serving the Lord during 9/11, the folks who led the Southern Baptist relief teams, Samaritans purses relief teams in the city. And we're also going to give a biblical perspective on Michael's going to teach, Riddell's going to teach on prophecy, on what's the future of the Middle East. Darrell Bach's going to talk about his ministry to Palestinian and Israeli pastors. And it's going to be a really wonderful time. And peppered in between all of these will be testimonies from those who serve. So we have a group of pastors who are on the ground serving the Lord during 9/11. And we have someone from the FBI who is in the pit digging out evidence. We have the oral surgeon who's a Messianic Jew who was identifying bodies by their dental records. And so it's really a combination, Kerby, you kind of nailed it, of where we are trying to let people know about what happened during 9/11 and how it impacted our world today, and then trying to see the whole thing through a biblical lens.
Let me just say that we have a link, first of all, to Chosen People Ministries. And, of course, anytime we've had Mitch Glaser on or Darrell Bach on, we've talked about that ministry. So that is there. We also, of course, have this very good press release put out by the A. Larry Ross Communications that went through the religion news surface. And if you follow the link, it will take you to, or you can go directly to 911theconference.com. If you go there, first of all, you can actually see the schedule and find out a little bit more about the various speakers and when they will be speaking, which, as I've mentioned before, is just kind of a who's who of people we've had on this program. Of course, we've had Ann Graham-Lotz on, we've had Darrell Bach, we've had Tom and Joanne Doyle, we've had, well, matter of fact, on Monday we'll have Michael Rydelnik, and of course we always have Joel Rosenberg, and he'll be on with us as well on Thursday. And so you have that opportunity for you to watch it. There's also a place that may be a little bit tight, but if your church would still want to be one of those satellite churches or some of those other issues, it's all available at 911theconference.com. And give us just a brief overview before we take a break of this idea of this new Middle East, because it is new. All of a sudden you have an armed Taliban that is now the best armed terrorist group perhaps we have ever seen in the 21st century. You still have what's left over of ISIS-K and all sorts of other things, Al-Qaeda. And in some respects, we really need to begin to understand that the map of the Middle East is starting to change, isn't it?
Yeah, so Kerby, what happened at 9/11 is that Israel was in the middle of the second intifada. There were bombings almost every week in Israel. And Americans and evangelicals in particular, even though evangelicals generally love Israel, that's waning a little bit these days, actually. But even though we love Israel, Israel is still sort of sometimes a little piece of an eschatological cosmic puzzle, and wasn't really, we didn't really know people. Some evangelicals tour Israel, but boy, oh boy, when the same terrorism that was hitting Israel, because it's all in the same stream, when it hit Israel, and then when it finally hit the United States, well, that awoke the United States to the great need to identify and pray for Israel. And I think it created a more human view of Israel, and it caused more support for Israel. And I loved it when I went to Israel after 9/11, and there was still, the second intifada was probably waning a little bit too, but not many tourists were coming. And I loved it when I heard leaders in Israel say, you know, the only ones who keep coming to Israel during these hard times are evangelical Christians.
So
and
true.
I love that. It's such a great testimony, Kerby, you know, and that people are willing to stand with Israel. And the second thing that has happened over the years, of course, is that some of the Gulf states and other countries have begun to realize, Egypt included, have begun to realize that maybe the little Satan, Israel, and the big Satan, the U.S., are not so satanic.
Yes.
And that even though there are a lot of differences, they're not, So I think people are taking sides, and the side is against terrorism for many Middle Eastern countries.
Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A recent article based on a Herzog Foundation survey concluded that Christian schools vastly outperform public schools. That shouldn't be too surprising since students in Christian schools usually outperform students in public schools. But a closer look at the survey showed that the results were measuring parental satisfaction rather than student performance. We've had more than a year of lockdowns and online education. A month ago, I quoted from a report from McKinsey & Company that discovered that student shutdowns harmed the educational progress of students. Students were, on average, 4 months behind in reading and 5 months behind in mathematics. This latest survey found that parents in Christian schools were far more satisfied with their child's education than parents of children in public schools. 4 in 5 of parents of children in Christian schools were satisfied, while only a majority of parents in public schools were satisfied, with more than 4 in 10 who were unsatisfied with the child's education during COVID. The survey found that during the pandemic, Christian school parents found it easier to manage their child's time, communicate with teachers, manage their child's assignments, and were better able to keep up their child's morale than parents of children in public schools. Christian school parents also reported their schools were open even as nearby public options were closed. More than a quarter of Christian schools never closed, while a mere 8% of public schools never closed. Now that school's in session, we are hearing more and more about mask mandates and possible lockdowns. These recent surveys and reports are a sobering reminder of the negative impact the past school year has had on student performance and the benefits of Christian education to both students and parents. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with Dr. Mitch Glaser for a few more minutes, and then we'll get into some issues in the news. And again, want you to be aware of the fact that you can actually participate in this 9/11 and the New Middle East Conference. We have a link for you to find it there, and if you want to go directly to 911theconference.com, you can find that and register, and I think you will benefit from it tremendously. But Mitch, for just a minute, let's see if we can talk about Israel, because it just occurred to me while you were talking about that today I was actually supposed to be in Israel. We do tours from time to time here at Point of View, and this one today would have put us at the Sea of Galilee, and we usually take people out on a boat. Then I tell some of the people that are there that, Jesus walked on water and Peter walked on water. If any of you want to get out of the boat and walk on water, give it a try. I haven't had any takers, but the bottom line is we're not in Israel, and you know why. That even though Israel is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world, still it is pretty much closed down, and those of us that had tours to Israel have had to basically cancel them. A few have been able to postpone them, but what's going on in Israel right now?
Yeah, Kerby, I had my trip in July was canceled, and then it looked like August would be open. I moved my ticket, then my trip in August was shut, and but Israel's now giving the booster shot, and a lot of people are getting it, and it seems like the numbers are getting much better and beginning to come down, and there is very active discussion about Israel opening again, probably either in later September or in October, and it might only be for tour groups at the start, and because of that, that's because Israel can screen you more effectively for having been vaccinated and so on. I don't think they're going to let anybody who can't prove vaccination into the country for a number of months. And the work of God in Israel continues. Our Chosen People missionaries are still ministering to Holocaust survivors, and we still have our young adult ministries in Ramat Gan, and our Jerusalem Center is functioning in our ministries across the country. But it's a real hardship because, Israel really thought it was through it, just like we thought we were through it. Delta came and leveled it. And so in-person services are barely happening right now, but beginning to happen. And remember, Israel was given some pretty steep fines if you broke your quarantine too. Mm-hmm. So it's nothing. Your average Israeli doesn't fool around with all that. And so, as they say, Kerby, or as David said, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They will prosper who love thee. And just continue to pray and remember to pray for God's work among the Jewish people and among Palestinians.
Very, very sad because, as you and I both know, and most of our listeners probably know, that a very significant part of the income to Israel comes from tourism, although it has been an incredible nation in terms of producing products and getting various patents and those kinds of things. But since you mentioned it, let's come back just for a minute before we go back to the conference and talk about this ongoing ministry that you have of Chosen People, because your ministry continues, and it is been a very dynamic ministry, and I suspect some of our listeners, because we've had Daryl Bach in studio, know about it, but I recognize some people might say, I've never heard of Chosen Ministries. What they all about?
Sure. In 1892, Rabbi Leopold Cohen came to the U.S. from Hungary and heard a Polish Presbyterian missionary to the Jews preaching the gospel on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Happens all the time, Kerby. And Rabbi Cohen heard the gospel, accepted Jesus, and began working among the hundreds of thousands of Jewish immigrants that were coming from Eastern Europe. And Chosen People was born in 1894, so we're 127 years old. We're in 20 countries around the globe, dozens of cities around the globe, proclaiming the good news to the Jew first and also to the Gentile, training Christians, helping Christians become better acquainted with Israel, with their Jewish heritage in the Messiah. And that's what we do each and every day. We're based, I am talking to you from our headquarters on the east side of Manhattan. So we're right in the middle of things.
Might just mention, too, we do have in that press release information about Chosen People Ministries, telling a little bit of the story of 1894, but also about the Alliance for Peace in Jerusalem. So let's, if we can, go back to the conference, because I'm encouraging people that even if they can't make it to New York City, and most of our listeners are traveling all over the country, but they can't make it to New York right now. So the best option is to click on 911theconference.com, and there's a place where you can actually watch what is taking place, everything from the candle lighting ceremony, the worship, various sessions that are taking place that come from some of the experts that we have had on this program. And if nothing else, the price is right, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we decided that everybody needs a gift in a tough time and tough season of life. So we actually were going to charge, and then I said, take it down. But Kerby, we already have close to 6,000 people registered online, and we have 150 to 200 coming to Trinity Baptist Church in the middle of Manhattan. I'm surprised that we have that many, and we will play it safe in case you want to jump on a plane and come. And so we're just expecting great things from the Lord, and we really want we want to make sure that the backstory of what God did during 9/11 is told. And so we've woven together the narrative and rooted it and grounded it in Scripture. But we want people to hear from people who got saved during 9/11, or the Arab brother who, because of 9/11, gave his heart to Christ. And Tom and Joanne Doyle are going to be able to fill in a lot of the gaps on what God's doing in the Muslim world as well as in the Jewish world. And so I think that it's going to be a great story. And we actually have additional content for those that are watching online, because those in person will need a lunch break. Now, you will miss out on the corned beef sandwich, so I'm sorry. But we're going to have a lunch break, and during that 90 minutes of lunch break, we're providing extra content for our brothers and sisters watching online. So I think it's going to be very valuable for everyone.
Again, one last time, Ann Graham Lotz, Joel Rosenberg, Dr. Darrell Bach, Dr. Michael Rydelnik, Tom and Joanne Doyle, all of the individuals have been on this program before. Of course, Mitch Glaser, who we've been talking to as well. And it is all available at our website, or you can go directly to 911theconference.com. And I did mention that some of these churches, we have pastors listening right now, they could actually have an opportunity, even at this late hour, to be a satellite church. Isn't that at least still a possibility?
Right, sure. We will set you right up immediately. It just all we need is people to come and for us to provide a link, and we'll be able to do that quickly. We have a couple of dozen that are already signed up, and during COVID days, you never know what's going to happen when you invite people to gather, and
nice.
Very different in every state of the union. But if you want to be a participant, we would love to have you. All you have to do is get on the website and you can register as a satellite church.
One last time, let me also mention that in addition to going to the conference, I really do recommend some of the resources. You can go to chosenpeople.com. They have also Joe Rosenberg's book, Enemies and Allies, the Moody Handbook on Messianic Prophecy, as well as so many others on Israel and the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And many of the individuals that we've interviewed on this program, they have books that are actually available on their website. And I would really encourage you to find out more about this ministry, because if you have Jewish friends, and no doubt all of us do, and you'd like to reach out to those people and you'd like to know what to do and how to witness and what to share, I think you would certainly benefit from so much great material at Chosen People Ministries. It's chosenpeople.com, and you can find a link on our website. So, again, Mitch Glaser, always great to have you on the program. I wish you well on the conference, and we wanted to do what we could to actually expose more and more of our listeners to what you're going to be doing on Friday and Saturday. So thank you for joining us again here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Very generous of you, and I appreciate it very much.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we will come back and get into a couple of issues in the news. One which I thought I'd start with, it's not necessarily one I've posted, but Larry O'Connor has, sorry, mainstream media, this we regret the error doesn't cut it anymore. He's been writing about this week the same things I've been talking about this week. The number of times in which the various mainstream media, and he uses that as the example, have actually told stories that were fake. They were not true. They were repeated time and time again. And after then faking it, or after they, in one case, USA Today, issuing a fact check, they had really to fact check the fact check. And so it's just a reminder. I won't spend a lot of time on it to actually illustrate once again one of the themes that seems to be running through this year, and that is the need for discernment. Whatever you see, read, and hear, even what you hear here, check it out. We encourage you to do so. That's why we post these articles on the website, pointofview.net. We'll come back and talk about that and much, much more right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I want to give you some facts and figures. Some of you sometimes like to write those down, so get something to write with, and I wanted you to at least have the numbers in case you want to write a letter to the editor, you want to write an email to your member of Congress, or whatever it might be. We want to always give you some of that information. And again, these are some facts and figures about what is happening in the Middle East. We will, this time next week, have Joel Rosenberg with us. He was supposed to be in studio with us. I wish he had been for no other reason than I think we have $10,000 worth of his previous book we were going to make available to some of the people coming out to hear him speak before COVID shut that down. And this time he's canceled again. So we'll be able to talk to him by phone, but it won't be the same as having him in studio and getting a chance to have a group of people meet him. But nevertheless, we will be doing that with him. We mentioned Dr. Michael Rydelnik. We'll be talking with him on Monday. So a lot of the individuals that you would actually hear if you were to go to this conference or go online, you'll hear some of them next week. And one of that is the Middle East is in some respects more dangerous than before. Let me give you some of these numbers. This comes from the British media, and I've seen numbers similar to it, so I have every reason to believe that these are accurate. We have left behind as a nation to the Taliban, are you ready for these numbers? 22,000 Humvees. 22,000 Humvees. 64,000 machine guns. And 358,000 assault rifles, making them the most armed terrorist group in the world, I think. I don't see how you could possibly come up with even a close second to that now. So in some respects, we have left Afghanistan worse than when we came into Afghanistan. Just think about that for just a minute. Now, if you want to get some of the other numbers there, our good friend Gary Bauer posted this yesterday in his end-of-day report, but he gives us a quote from Donald Trump Jr., who said, "Whoever crafted Joe Biden's Build Back Better slogan may want to remind Joe that they were referring to America and not the Taliban terrorists." Just a minute, by the way, I'm going to talk about who are in positions of authority in the Taliban. Many of them were in various places like Guantanamo and then were released. But we'll get to that in just a minute. What I think, interesting enough, don't take my word for it, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, you remember him? He's been on the program with us many times before, said now the Taliban is now the best armed criminal enterprise in the history of mankind. And I don't think that's hyperbole at all. The Taliban is now better armed, stronger, and in control of Afghanistan. That was not true a year ago. And they were not that much in control 20 years ago, but they are now. And that's what we left. So if you can't see that as a complete disaster, well, I don't know what other numbers I can give you, but I just thought you might want to know some of that as well. And so there are attempts in some cases to force the military to give an accounting of the U.S. weapons left in Afghanistan. And that was actually an amendment which was proposed in the House Oversight Committee by Representative Nancy Mace, who was a representative, Republican from South Carolina, and they killed the amendment in the committee, which gives you some idea of how as much as possible, there's an attempt to hide the figures, and there are some other articles coming out in that regard. Well, let me go on for just a minute and point out that if you look at who are in the positions of authority now in the Taliban, 4 of the 5 would, I think, legitimately be considered terrorist leaders that were actually in prison, and President Barack Obama and Joe Biden, at that time the vice president, so the president and vice president traded those individuals for the army deserter Bowie Bergdahl. And then the 5th Taliban leader was actually released in 2014 by President Obama, and he's been named the provincial governor. This is the one that's most interesting to me. The Taliban have what's kind of equivalent of the FBI. Let's not overplay this. This is a bunch of tribal terrorists. But nevertheless, the closest thing they have to something like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, kind of a Justice Department, is Sirajuddin, I haven't said the name too often, Haqqani, Sirajuddin Haqqani, and you might say, okay, who's he? Well, he's kind of like the Attorney General, or he's like the head of the FBI for the Taliban. Oh yeah, he's on the FBI's most wanted list. There's a $10 million bounty on his head, and he is running essentially what I kind of describe as the FBI of the Taliban. So that just as a quick look at what has happened in this so-called new Middle East. We will spend some more time talking about that with Joe Rosenberg, and we'll probably get into some of that tomorrow in our second hour. Our first hour, interesting enough, we're going to be talking about one of the new films. Matter of fact, the newest film by the Kendrick brothers. Alex Kendrick will be in studio with us. We'll be talking about Show Me the Father, and then we'll have Penna-Dexter and Kelly Shackelford in here, so we'll get maybe back into some of that as well. Before we take a break, by the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I might take some calls. I did want to get back to this piece by Larry O'Connor, who's been, in a sense, writing about the same things I've been talking about over the last week or so. And that is, first of all, you have this what I think you could call a news hoax. And the story was, I mentioned it just briefly yesterday, but let me get into it a little bit more, that patients in Oklahoma in these hospitals, some of them which had gunshot wounds, are actually not able to get into these emergency rooms in Oklahoma because of some of these people in Oklahoma that were overdosing on ivermectin, which I mentioned before. And this whole story, of course, didn't sound very accurate from the very beginning, that somehow it was almost overplayed. You know, if you live in Manhattan and you hear this is happening in Oklahoma, you'd go, oh, yeah, that's probably true. You know, people getting shot right and left in Oklahoma because it's the Wild West. And then those Okies are shooting each other up. And so they're not even smart enough to not know that they're not supposed to take ivermectin, which is a cattle dewormer internally. And it just didn't have any sense of accuracy. And yet, guess what? Our friends at the Rolling Stone decided to run with that, which was interestingly enough, because I checked later, it really was a single source narrative. Now, you would think that the mainstream media would say, you know, we've made some mistakes. Matter of fact, Larry O'Connor reminds us of the mistakes they made when they identified this one young boy, pro-life, from Covington High School, but he had kind of a grimace on his face, and they accused him of actually confronting some of these individuals, when it turned out it was actually just the opposite, and they actually ran his name through the dirt and Covington High School through the dirt and all of the rest. They decided to sue. Guess what? They won on some of that as well. And you would think that if nothing else, there would be sort of a lesson to say, maybe we shouldn't always leap to false conclusions simply because it fits our preconceived narrative. Just 2 days ago, I had a piece talking about confirmation bias, and here's a classic illustration of it, of confirmation bias. So anyway, he takes us through some of these stories, and some of them go all the way back to other times in which you've had the media in one way or another misrepresent facts. The editorial board of the New York Post finally had enough of this and said, you know, we've listened to media writers bemoan that they cannot control the flow of information anymore. Why are people turning to those dark corners of the web? Well, when you ignore a major presidential scandal broken by a well-respected wire service, exaggerate and obfuscate, and then use fact checks to try to dismiss the truth, what credibility do you think you're due? And that, of course, gets into the other one in which the argument was being made through the so-called fact checkers of USA Today that President Biden was not checking his watch. Now think about what they were saying. They were saying that these Gold Star families were lying, or they misrepresented what was said. Again, I don't have a real problem if a president checks their watch, but I do remember in a debate that George Herbert Walker Bush did with Ross Perot and Bill Clinton. One time he checked his watch during the debate, and that became a big issue, apparently, for some individuals. And again, if the president's checking his watch, okay. But then to say that he wasn't checking his watch, and you are actually incorrect by saying he was checking his watch, and the only time he ever checked his watch was after the ceremony when you have the video showing that it's not the case, I think you can see why we're kind of dealing with this really striking set of examples in which the media, first of all, misrepresents facts and doesn't check facts. And then, even as this particular article I hadn't thought about, I did read to you yesterday the corrections and clarifications, but he said, at least Larry O'Connor said, when they say things like, we regret the error, that's not really an apology. It's just simply said, well, it's just we didn't get our facts right, and sorry that you took them the wrong way, even though we misrepresented them in the first place. Another good reason to exercise a level of discernment. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View.
your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Matt Markins is going to be with us next hour briefly. We're going to talk about Awana. We'll get back into some of the issues in the news. Off air, I was just asking a minute ago, where did all those facts and figures come from in terms of the Humvees and everything like that? First of all, you can find that the New York Times has done a very good piece on that, but I was actually quoting from what is called the Sunday Times, and they have a very good infographic, which is entitled Taliban's New Arsenal. So you could type in the Sunday Times, you could type in the Taliban's New Arsenal, which, by the way, it looks almost identical to the one of the in the New York Times. So I'm wondering if actually that was produced by the Sunday Times in London and then was reprinted by the New York Times, or vice versa. I haven't really been able to check that out, but either way, that's where you can find it. If you go to Twitter and type in the Sunday Times or type in the Taliban's New Arsenal, you'll see that infographic, and it actually, I'd only gave you a few of those because I didn't even mention the helicopters, the fixed-wing aircraft, and everything else. I mean, this is like equipping not a third world country, but almost like a second world country militarily. Certainly, we in the United States and in China and in Russia have more armaments than that. But it is, to me, absolutely amazing. So anyway, since we were asked the question off the air, always like to give you the facts and figures, and you can check them out for yourself. Actually, it's actually worse than I reported because I didn't even talk about all the helicopters and everything else, but I gave just a little bit of an idea of what that is. And if we can, I might see if I can work it out to even post that infographic later today. If we have some time, maybe I'll see grab Karen or somebody like that, and we'll put it on our Facebook page. And then you would have everything that you would need if you wanted to express that to other individuals. But let me get into a couple of other issues. And one of those has to do with the reality of what is happening right now in north of Afghanistan. As we sometimes say, Kelly Shackelford loves to say this a little too often, and maybe we overuse the phrase, but you cannot make this stuff up. Because right now, we can't seem to get the Biden administration to build a wall or build border facilities in the South. Matter of fact, they want to actually tear some of those down. Would you not be surprised, and I would hope you would be surprised, but unfortunately the case, that even though there's been an attempt not to finish the border wall, the Biden administration just announced that they are building border facilities in what? Tajikistan. Now, again, I know you don't necessarily know the geography of the Middle East, but Tajikistan borders on Afghanistan, and you can understand exactly why they would want to have that border facility, because we're going to probably see a mass of refugees moving out. Now, if you're in Afghanistan and you head west, you're going into Iran. That's kind of going from the fire into the furnace or something. I mean, it does not necessarily the place you want to go. If you go the other direction, you're going into Pakistan, probably not real good either. So you maybe be more inclined to take your chances of going north to one of the STAN countries, and so one of those is Tajikistan. And you have to laugh about this because otherwise you just go down and cry. We, as a country, are wanting to help them build border facilities in Tajikistan while our border itself, south of the border, is actually not being dealt with in any significant way. So anyway, that's just another one of those pieces that I think you might want to get into. And some of this, of course, comes from some of the writing that Gary Bauer has done, because he was pointing out, while we're talking about fact-checking, I'm going to move on to some other topics, they have been doing a little bit of fact-checking occasionally Joe Biden. Every time he gets up there, he says something. And I did see the other day, I'd never seen this before, but some of the individuals in the Biden administration in the West Wing, which is associated, of course, to the White House, when the president gets up and does a press conference, they turn the sound off. because otherwise some of them are just going to get an ulcer because of something he said. And of course, while we've been talking about this Jewish issue, during a call the other day to some of these Jewish leaders, President Biden reminded the audience that he had visited the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh after that horrific shooting that took place. You might remember that in October of 2018. Just one problem. He never had visited the Tree of Life Synagogue. And people are trying to figure out, does he just say this because then it sounds good? Does he really believe this? And, of course, Gary Bauer goes into all the other ones that he've mentioned about the fact that he claimed he once confronted a gang leader, that he graduated on the top of his class with 3 degrees, which turned out to be anything but true. He, of course, told this incredible story of pinning medals on a war hero in Afghanistan. That did not happen. And the list is getting longer by the day. And it's at least somewhat heartening to see that some people are becoming a little bit more encouraged about some of this. But just before we wind our way down, the other issue that I haven't really talked much about is, of course, we've had Hurricane Ida. And the other day, President Biden went to New Jersey, and he used that as a backdrop to push his $3.5 trillion climate change infrastructure bill, saying that we don't have any more time. We actually have to do what we can immediately to address this issue of climate change. Well, it was interesting to look at the fact that if you are really concerned about greenhouse gases coming from urban areas, this new study that just came out, and Jeff Parsons is the author, in case you wanted to find it for yourself, although I am sure I'm going to do a commentary on this, so wait till the commentary comes out and I'll give you all the facts and figures and numbers. But it is a survey looking at the top 25 megacities that actually produce 52% of the world's urban greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, if you really are concerned about greenhouse gas emissions and you're convinced that we can do something about that, and those are 2 very big ifs, but let's assume both of those can be dealt with, would you not want to focus your time and attention on the top 24 cities that produce more than half of all the greenhouse gases? Does that make sense? There's just one problem with that. Of the top 25 megacities, 23 of them are in China. 23 of the 25. In case you're wondering what the other 2 are, I go down the list here because I got the list in front of me here, and Moscow is 7th. Tokyo, Japan is 17th. So except for Moscow and Tokyo, Japan, all the others are China cities, the top 25. Now, to be fair, 26 is New York City, but then you have to scroll all the way down again to pick up only 2 other cities in the top 50. One is Chicago. No, I take it back. There's 3 because there's Los Angeles is somewhere in there. And so Los Angeles, Chicago, and then the real surprise is San Diego. Wouldn't have put that one in the list. But the point I'm making is that if you wanted to address this issue of greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from major cities, the bottom line is they're, in most cases, 23 out of 25 coming from China. Then you have Moscow and Tokyo. And then you have, of course, New York City and Chicago and Los Angeles, again, run by Democratic mayors, so let them work on it. And you can begin to see that the problem could be solved very quickly, but instead the finger pointing always goes to the number of cattle, the fact that you're eating meat, the fact that we have people still driving cars. But when you get down to the greenhouse gases, most of them are coming from these cities in China. And if you seriously think that anything we do in the United States is going to mitigate against what's happening in China, you're living in a fantasy world indeed. Let's take a break, though. We are going to come back and talk with Matt Markins about Awana. Then we'll get back into some other very important issues in the news, which we will cover right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, first hour we spent a little bit of time talking about a conference that you could attend or either a visit through online, and that was, of course, our 9/11 and the two new Middle East conference. But I want to tell you about another one that you need to know about, and it is tied into our good friends at Awana. It is called the Child Discipleship Forum. And again, we're going to talk about some of that and also give you a little bit more of an understanding of the Awana outreach that is so extensive all these years. And we do that by going to Matt Markins, who is the president and chief strategy officer of Awana. He served in leadership roles in the past at Randall House and Thomas Nelson Publishers, and is also the co-founder of D6 Conference, which is kind of a discipleship and family ministry community. Perhaps best known for his book Resilient, which is child discipleship and the fearless future of the church. And he joins us now by phone. So Matt, thank you so very much for joining with us. And for just a few minutes, if you can, from time to time when I'll say Awana, people will go, what's that? And I'm like, really? I mean, all my kids went through it. Oh, we have individuals here that have been through it for years, but I recognize that still some people do not know about the incredible ministry of Awana. Can you give us a kind of thumbnail sketch for it?
You got it. Hey, Kerby, great to be with you. Awana is a leading global child discipleship organization. We are in 130 countries. A lot of people think of us as something that happens in their local church, which is true. But in terms of the full scope, we work with 62,000 churches all around the world. And what we do is we equip church leaders and parents and volunteers to lead kids to Jesus through the gospel and to walk alongside them in discipleship. We have large group activities, small group activities, ways to engage kids through games and other things, and then be able to push that into the home to equip and inspire parents and local guardians to disciple their own kids. That's what we do.
Well, and again, very exciting, and I imagine that some of the listeners here can say, I still even know where my badges are on my little uniform and all the rest, and I can still recount some of the scripture verses I memorized and on and on. So just some incredible things that I have always been so excited about in terms of Awana. And if your church does not have one, as you might imagine, since we're talking with the president and chief strategy officer for Awana, we have a link to that. But I also want to use that as a transition, because when I've seen you on video, most of the time you're talking about discipleship, and you're really talking about discipline. You're talking about being a disciple. You're talking about different aspects of that in one way or another. And so here is a forum that you're putting together, which will be taking place September 16th and 17th. Again, if you're located near the center of the country, you could go to it at Nashville, Tennessee, or you can also attend it online. So give us an understanding of what's going to be taking place at the forum.
Sure, absolutely. When talking about discipleship, it's not a matter of are we being discipled. It's more of a question of what are we being discipled by? What is forming us as human beings, and especially as it relates to our children. And so we're hosting the Child Discipleship Forum in Nashville, Tennessee, and online. Your listeners can go to childdiscipleshipforum.com. And the reason this is important, if your listeners can think to themselves right now, like, do you have a child or a grandchild, niece or a nephew, or some child in your life who you care about, right? And then the second question would be, when you think about their future, Are you concerned about the future world they're going into? Well, if you would say yes to both of those questions, this opportunity is for you. Why? Because our children are swimming in a couple of cultures. One of them, what we call a secular culture. What is secularism? You guys probably talk about this a lot in your program. Secularism, the simplest definition of secularism is it's the diminishing of God and emphasis on individualism, right? It's just saying God doesn't matter, and it's all about you. You be you, your body, your choice. We all hear these sayings in our culture. This is the culture that our kids are swimming in. And the other culture that we're swimming in is what we would call a post-Christian culture, meaning a post-Christian culture is a culture that desires the fruit, the goals, and the outcomes of Christianity, but without Christ. It's the kingdom without the king. So we think about justice, freedom, love, happiness, all of these attributes. Where do they come from? Well, we know they come from God. They come from the gospel. They come from the Bible. But the broader dominant culture wants them without God. This is the culture our kids are swimming in. So we've got to have better conversations around how to form them in the image of Jesus Christ.
Let's talk about how things have changed. When my kids were going through Awana, they did not have cell phones because they did not exist. They may have had some limited access to the internet, but not a great deal. We also didn't have television on all the day. So in some respects, the influences maybe came from the groups that they were associated with. And if you get them around good kids, sometimes you'd end up with good kids yourself. And certainly the church programs and the Christian programs and all that were there. This now, as you well are aware, is a very different generation, because we now, when we talk about Generation Z, are talking about digital natives. They have never lived in a world where cell phones didn't exist, and they now can spend more than 10 hours a day in front of a screen. And so it, I think, underscores even more this whole idea of discipleship and really of getting Christian content, because they are getting a series of messages from the world that are not only not Christian, but in many cases are anti-Christian, aren't they?
Absolutely. You know, doctors and physicians say that the greatest epidemic of our time is actually loneliness and isolation. We are more connected than we ever have been in terms of technology, which gives us the opportunity for a relationship, but many of them are pseudo relationships. They're not real. They're not authentic relationships. They're curated. The curation of how we want people to perceive us. What today's children need is loving, caring adults engaged in their life. You probably are familiar that the Harvard Center for the Developing Child did a study on children and resiliency. They were trying to figure out, for kids who face trauma and challenges, why do some kids bounce back and some kids stay down, right? The answer is it was the presence of a loving, caring adult. All their research showed that when a child has a loving, caring adult in arm's length of them and consistent engagement in their life, that child's likelihood for long-term success, based on a variety of markers, was considerably higher. So as people of the faith, as people of the word, we should be thinking, well, if that is universal research that's not necessarily Christian specific, but we're people all about relationships and about the gospel, that should mean a lot to the church. The church should be the leading entity in any community that's highly relational with kids. This is the number one thing our kids need, is because through relationships, what happens? They can get access to the gospel. They can have a mentor, just like Jesus, like what we see in the New Testament, who's discipling them in the image of Christ.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this event, the Child Discipleship Forum, September 16th and 17th. We'll talk about some of the speakers there, Ed Stesser, Dave Kinnaman, Gabe Lyons, just a lot of people we've had on this program before, including the conversation we're having right now with Matt Markins. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more, we have some links that you can follow on our website at pointofview.net. Of course, we also have a link to Awana, and I do commend that to your church. If you don't already have an Awana program, you need to develop one. We'll take a break, talk a little bit more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A recent article based on a Herzog Foundation survey concluded that Christian schools vastly outperform public schools. That shouldn't be too surprising since students in Christian schools usually outperform students in public schools. But a closer look at the survey showed that the results were measuring parental satisfaction rather than student performance. We've had more than a year of lockdowns and online education. A month ago, I quoted from a report from McKinsey & Company that discovered that student shutdowns harmed the educational progress of students. Students were, on average, 4 months behind in reading and 5 months behind in mathematics. This latest survey found that parents in Christian schools were far more satisfied with their child's education than parents of children in public schools. 4 in 5 of parents of children in Christian schools were satisfied, while only a majority of parents in public schools were satisfied, with more than 4 in 10 who were unsatisfied with the child's education during COVID. The survey found that during the pandemic, Christian school parents found it easier to manage their child's time, communicate with teachers, manage their child's assignments, and were better able to keep up their child's morale than parents of children in public schools. Christian school parents also reported their schools were open even as nearby public options were closed. More than a quarter of Christian schools never closed, while a mere 8% of public schools never closed. Now that school's in session, we are hearing more and more about mask mandates and possible lockdowns. These recent surveys and reports are a sobering reminder of the negative impact the past school year has had on student performance and the benefits of Christian education to both students and parents. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Matt Markins with us. And if you'd like to join us, maybe you have a comment or a question about Awana or discipleship or anything related to that, child discipline. All of those are very important topics, and certainly we do welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll get back into some of the issues in the news in just a few minutes. But before we do so, I thought, Matt, you might talk about some of the speakers, because you really do have kind of a who's who of individuals, many of whom have been on this program at different times talking about various topics. So give us a little bit of a feel for what will be taking place September 16th and 17th, some of the speakers, some of the topics, and why individuals listening right now might want to attend.
Absolutely. There's 3 areas, kind of 3 lenses we're looking through as we invited our speakers to come be a part of this. The first one is cultural analysis. We've done some of that just a few minutes ago, just talking about the broader dominant culture and how it's shaping our children. The second area is child advocacy, meaning just this idea that working with children and investing in children matters, and it may even be some of the most important work of the church today. And the third lens that we're looking through is local church practice, meaning what can we do in local churches to be more fruitful in what we're doing in forming and discipling children. So with those 3 lenses being the case, and when it comes to cultural analysis, you can understand why we would have Ed Stetzer, David Kinnaman, Gabe Lyons, and Dr. Christopher Yuan. Dr. Christopher Yuan, as you probably know, was converted to Christianity, and he left his homosexual lifestyle behind as he realized a disciple is a surrendering of every part of who he is into Jesus. So he has an incredible story. Gabe Lyons, as you know, hosts the Cultural Summit with Q Ideas. Researcher Ed Stetzer has a lot of information around how what we could expect the near future to look like and how that's shaping our children. But then we also have speakers who are going to be sharing about local church practice. We have Pastor Darren Whitehood, Ellie Bonilla, Dr. Denise Keysville of Bethel Seminary. We have kids pastors like Leah Broach and Sam Luce, and we have some academics as well. But the bottom line is we want to give people insight, right? But we want to give them practical next steps to begin to be more fruitful in their home and in the church as they seek to make child disciples in a highly secularized culture.
You know, one of the questions that is on the website there is, why are kids leaving the church after high school? And you may not know me very well, but one of the things Pro Ministries has done this last year is another survey. We did one in 2010, then in 2020. And again, we've begun to identify the larger group of what are oftentimes called the nuns. We just simply refer to them as unaffiliated. But you have a remarkable number, virtually almost a tripling of the number of those who are unaffiliated. They would, if you were asking about their religious affiliation, would say atheist, agnostic, or no preference. And we also recognize a good number of them are already gone, if you will. That's the title of a book that actually did a survey finding that even by middle school, some of these individuals, these young people are already changing their minds. And so it really is, I think, key when you're talking about this issue of discipleship to begin to focus on that very early on, because if you do not, you are going to see this mass exodus of these young people from church, even sometimes before high school, but certainly after they graduate from high school.
Yeah, we said early on, Kerby, that everyone's being discipled. It's a matter of what is discipling you. Whom are you being discipled by? So if as a Christian, we're treating our faith like just getting in a canoe and getting in the river and just coasting downstream, well, the Christian life is more like rowing upstream, because the broader dominant culture is aiming to shape us in the image of all of those forces, right? So with that being the backdrop, I think the thing we need to focus on in light of what you were just saying is the Barna stat that says that a human being's worldview is largely set by the age 13. Let's think about that.
Yes.
You alluded to that with what you said about the middle school and the work that you did. You know, think about, like, a 13-year-old 2 years ago was the 11-year-old who was finishing children's ministry 2 years before that, 9, 2 years before that, 7. So if a worldview is set by age 13, we need to be asking harder questions about what's happening with our children's ministry and what we can do to come alongside of parents to help them engage as disciple makers in the home. So what we're trying to say is, if this church dropout thing is a problem, which we believe it is, we actually think it's more of a children's ministry problem than a youth ministry problem, because worldview is set by age 13 or 14.
So well said. And I appreciate you bringing that up. And I'm hoping pastors and church leaders and Sunday school teachers are hearing that right now. Let's, before we run out of time, talk about how people can sign up, because you have two options. Obviously, we do broadcast in places like Tennessee and neighboring states where people could attend face-to-face. And so there's an on-site registration, and then there's an online registration. I recognize, since we broadcast in about 40 different states, most people are going to actually participate online, and you actually have some pre-conference material when the people at your sessions are at lunch. There's some other opportunities for online attendees. So actually, if you go online, you're going to get some really significant benefit. But talk about how people can sign up and what that entails.
Yeah, thanks, Kerby. If you go to childdiscipleshipforum.com, that's 3 words, childdiscipleshipforum.com, and you scroll down a bit, your listeners will see the registration. You can click there for online, or you can click there for on-site. We have pricing for individuals as well as groups, and so to make it easier for you, for those people who are in the Nashville, Middle Tennessee area or within driving distance, we've got COVID precautions in place. But for those of you online, the vast majority, we would love to have you hop online. You might even want to keep scrolling down to the bottom of the website. We've got about 50 organizations you'll recognize so many of the logos of the organizations who are standing alongside of Awana saying this conversation matters. But if you want to hop online, check that out. We will be streaming it to you, and we have a 30-day replay. So if you can't be there quite on those days, next Thursday, Friday, on the 16th and 17th, there's a 30-day replay option so you and your team can watch it together afterwards.
So again, these are opportunities for training of individuals. I think a parent would certainly be interested, but certainly if you're teaching young people, that would be the case. And one of the things we've been doing as you've been talking is we've also posted on the screen not only the link to the website for Awana, but also the Facebook page and the Twitter posts so people can follow you there. But while we're doing that, let's just mention that there are probably some churches that say, Awana, never heard of it, or I've always been thinking about it, but I really haven't really wanted to pursue that. What will they find when they land at your website? Because we also have that information so that if people are unfamiliar with Awana or they want to develop a program, they can simply go to awana.org, and there's a lot of great material there. And so talk about what they will find when they land on that webpage.
We have three major programs. I'll talk about our first one, which is our what we typically call midweek program. You talked about it earlier, an Awana Club. These ministries are typically done in the midweek or on a Sunday night, but it's an opportunity for your children and students in your church, ages 2 to 18. We have clubs for about 6 different age groups in there, where they're going to get large group time, small group time, game time interaction. They're going to get loving, caring adults who are going to teach them the Bible and help them memorize God's Word and to walk as a disciple. And we also have a brand new weekend curriculum. It's entirely digital, downloadable. It's got videos to help teach your kids the Bible and to help them grow as resilient disciples. It's called Bright Curriculum. You can go to Bright Curriculum, BRITE, brightcurriculum.com. and check that out. And then our third and final major program around the world is our outside of the U.S. program that's going on all around the world. So if you're on the missions team at your church and you're thinking about scalable ways to reach more kids with the gospel and to disciple them in developing nations, what we do outside the U.S. is mind-blowing. We need to do a whole broadcast just on that because it's so exciting. There's almost 5 million kids around the world who are in Awana, and largely due to our international program. So those are our three major programs that we have to help reach and disciple children.
Well, Matt, I appreciate you joining with us. We had a number of people around the studio here that remember with great fondness the Awana program, so they were thrilled that you would be on here, but most importantly, also wanted to focus on this childdiscipleshipforum.com is the link, the Child Discipleship Forum, and it takes place next week. And thank you for spending some time with us today promoting that, and we look forward to a great conference next week.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me on.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a couple of other issues. And I've had a couple of questions off the air about what I just mentioned in passing, so I'm willing to get back into it. What is the new arsenal for the Taliban? So I'll give you a little bit more of the numbers and also a little more of the backstory. I wasn't really thinking we were going to get into it today, but since I've been getting some questions about that, okay, we'll see if we can answer those, because there's some pretty good evidence right now that the Biden administration is trying to hide some of those numbers. And again, what's going on? I mean, after all, if we have armed the Taliban, let's just face the facts rather than try to hide it. And of course, there are political reasons for all of that. And we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. You know, just a few minutes ago, I kind of mentioned in passing, because I thought you might want to know some of the facts and figures on the military equipment we left behind in Afghanistan. And I want to try to answer a few of the questions that came off air and try to be fair as I can. First of all, if you go to some of those websites, we'll try to put it on the Point of View Facebook website a little bit later, you'll see this graphic that if those of you watching online can see, but if you, of course, are not watching online, let me just mention that it has 22,000 Humvees and a number of other armored personnel carriers, trucks, SUVs, 64,000 machine guns, 8,000 trucks, 162,000 radios, 358,000 assault rifles, 126,000 pistols, and I didn't even mention when I was giving you the list of the number of helicopters, 33 of the Black Hawk helicopters, 33 M117s, 43 MD-530s. So you're talking about more than 100 helicopters. And then you have fixed-wing aircraft and a number of others. And so the first question people have been asking off air, and you're welcome to ask them on air as well, is why aren't we hearing more about that? Well, I have in front of me here a piece that comes from the Washington Examiner, which has also been reported in openthebooks.com and a number of other places, that there is very good evidence, and really nobody's challenging it, that the Biden administration has been trying to hide as much of this as possible. This particular article that appears in the Washington Examiner, Biden administration officials directed federal agencies to wipe any detailed lists from their websites that outline quantity, or cost of U.S. military equipment. The cost, did you love that one? And training to Afghanistan security forces. Now, the argument that comes from the State Department is that we want to do this to protect Afghan allies after the government's collapse. And so that led to another question that people are saying. Just because we left this arsenal behind, do we actually know that the Taliban controls it all? And the answer is they control the country. If they don't control all of this equipment, okay, that's a possibility because, after all, this is a country that also has ISIS-K and Al-Qaeda, but I think it's reasonable to assume that they control this arsenal, and there are other ways to validate that. We don't have access to sensitive military security information, obviously, but we do have access to YouTube. And if you go out on YouTube right now, I've seen these videos of there being almost military-like parades. I'm just thinking of the one I saw in particular in Kabul, where you have all of these Taliban fighters on, most of them seem to be Humvees or armored personnel carriers, scrolling through the town. And so you can see that those pieces of equipment are still functional and they are still using them, and they probably have access to a lot of those rifles. But the argument that has been also made is, yes, but some of those pieces of equipment have been there for a long time. Yes, some of them have. Maybe some of them have been there for 20 years. After all, we've been there that long. But much of which at Bagram's probably been there a lot less. But let's give, again, the military the opportunity to speak to this. I'll now quote from General Frank McKenzie. He was the commander of the U.S. Central Command, and he said that the military destroyed or rendered inoperable numerous articles of equipment, including some of these Humvees. So, okay, 22,000 Humvees. Some of them were indeed rendered inoperable. Then they also said that they rendered inoperable some of the aircraft. McKenzie said, quote, "Those aircraft will never fly again when we left. They'll never be able to be operated by anyone." Probably true. But then you also have the videos, and again, if you haven't seen this video, there's a video of a Black Hawk helicopter being flown by, obviously, a Taliban pilot of some sort who was using the helicopter, the Black Hawk helicopter, to actually put a flag, a Taliban fighter flag, on a building in Kandahar. So you can see that while it probably is true that the Taliban may not own all and have control of all of the arsenal, they have control of a significant amount of it. How long has the arsenal been there? Anywhere from 20 years to 1 year. Are some of them actually rendered inoperable? Yes, the answer to that is true. And yet, are some of them still functional? I think probably most of them are, given the urgency which was used to actually remove the military fairly quickly. Don't forget that the first groups to leave Afghanistan, the CIA. Yeah, the intelligence agency. The ones that were saying, I don't think the Taliban are going to need very long to take over the country, and so they took off first. So that's what we know. There is a lot more that the military knows. There's a lot more the State Department knows. There's a lot more that the president knows. We don't have access to that information, but just using some common sense and looking at some of the videos I've seen, I think I can try to answer some of those questions, and if we find out more information, glad to pass it on to you. Let me also mention that we Kyle Smith, but I also, for just a few minutes, wanted to get to a as the really interesting title, My University Sacrificed Ideas for Ideology. Thinking, ethics, the Socratic method. I teach classes like science and pseudoscience and the philosophy of science. And one of the things he's done over the years is invite people in with whom he disagrees. Matter of fact, it used to be quite often that would happen. That's how many times I got to go into college classrooms at Vanderbilt or Auburn or Alabama or San Jose State or University of Colorado or Princeton or University of Michigan or Texas A&M or SMU. I just think of all the different places I've been over the years in which I was able to speak in classrooms. And he will bring in guest lecturers with whom he may disagree. Now, some of them are on the fringe, like flat earthers he talks about. He says he has brought himself, although I've never been in his class, global climate skeptics, Occupy Wall Street advocates, and others. And it's only so well the philosophy that says ideas need to be challenged and we need to have a good and robust debate. Actually has been doing that, but if you actually read through this story, it is a really sad story indeed of an individual who, once he began to do this in more of the 21st century, up until that time, probably somewhat free to do that. But then you started to have a situation where, and I'll move now to the third page, in which the 2016-2017 academic year, a former student complained about me and the university and initiated a Title IX investigation, which then made all sorts of allegations, and as a result, allowed to actually teach certain courses. Though they found that he was innocent of some of the claims, they also recommended that the professor would have to receive coaching. And of course, you know what that ends up being like. There was no apology, he points out, for the false accusations and the rest. And so by this time, he was absolutely convinced of the scholarship that was, and he puts this in quote, the corrupt bodies of scholarship that were responsible for actually publishing all sorts of, if you will, academic pap. And so he published one, and it's pretty gross, so I won't talk about it, but he published it, and the fact that it was actually able to make it to a journal illustrates the point. But because he did that, then all of a sudden swastikas began to show up in the bathroom with his name under them. Swastikas were put on his office door, a bag of feces on his door. Then you had an individual accusing him of beating his wife and his kids. A full-scale investigation goes, and finally, I can just simply say, he concluded that he just simply could not live with this any longer, and so alerted everybody at Portland State. A tragic story indeed of how an individual who was really trying to seek truth, really trying to encourage students to think critically, eventually just got driven out of the university, and even in the last days had people pulling the fire alarm, cutting the speaker wires of the microphones and everything else. And we wanted you to read about that, and it's on our website at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Winding down the Thursday program, but let me just mention real quickly, if you just happen to join us, because I know people are tuning in and tuning out all the time. I doubt very many of you have a chance to sit down and listen to all 2 hours, and if you do, thank you so very much. But first hour, we did spend some time talking about this conference, which is free, so I think it is something you may really want to watch on this weekend, Friday and Saturday, 9/11, and the new Middle East Conference. And so I really appreciate the opportunity that we had there to talk about that conference. And that was in the first hour. Then we did spend a little bit of time talking about the Child Discipleship Forum. That one will cost you something, but it certainly seems like a very good investment, especially if you're a church leader or a teacher of a Sunday school class or something of that nature. So we wanted you to know about some of that. My commentary today, while we're talking about discipleship and children, is on Christian schools. And this article came out just recently, in which you had the Herzog Foundation, which did a survey of Christian schools and found they vastly outperform public schools. No real surprise there. We really encourage you to consider putting your kids and grandkids in a Christian school. It wasn't so much about the academic performance, although I did a commentary earlier on that when we talked about the study from the McKinsey and Company that found, especially in the public schools, that students were on average, because of the shutdowns, 4 months behind in reading and 5 months behind in mathematics. And it just gets worse and worse. It's just like a row of falling dominoes that is not good. But this survey by Herzog Foundation really was looking at parents, and they found parents of Christian schools where their kids were in Christian schools were much more satisfied with their children's education. 4 out of every 5, 80%, were satisfied, where you had just a bare majority of parents in the public schools were satisfied, and 4 in 10 were very unsatisfied with what was happening there. And they found, for example, that Christian school parents found it easier to manage their child's time, easier to communicate with the teachers, easier to manage their child's assignments, and they were much better able to keep up with their child's morale than parents of children in the public schools. So I give you some of those facts and figures because I think you would probably want to know about that, and that's my commentary for today. And as I've mentioned before, you can receive these in your inbox. All you simply need to do is go to pointofview.net and then scroll down, and you'll see an opportunity for you to sign up. You'll receive my commentaries in your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna Dexter's commentary, which I've already mentioned just yesterday and we'll talk about tomorrow when she's in studio, will come to your website or to your inbox on Saturday. So again, those are for you as well. Just before we take a break, we did have Labor Day on Monday, and I thought I'd come back to the issue of work and labor for just a minute as a way to conclude, and to recognize that this idea of working is definitely a Christian principle. We see this in Genesis 1 and in Genesis 2, the Dominion Covenant, the cultural mandate. We see it even in some of the famous books, Max Weber, for example, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, a good example of the fact that really what we have had in Western culture is this emphasis upon work and the work ethic, which is really something that has made this country great. And Jerry Newcomb, our good friend, points out that the work ethic now may be in decline because of the decline of Christianity. And in his piece, he says, America, it's time to get back to work. He quotes from Victor Davis Hanson, somebody we quote from quite often here at Point of View, who described all sorts of problems. Victor Davis Hanson said, airliners cannot take off due to fuel shortages. Automobiles, houses, gas and lumber in short supply. Consumers can't get their roofs fixed, their houses painted, or their trees trimmed as employers plead with their idle, government-subsidized employees to come back to work. The numbers here are pretty staggering. For example, if you go to Yahoo, I should say, and the finance section of yahoo.com, one of the headlines there, half of U.S. small businesses have unfilled positions. Or how about Bloomberg? Here's one of them. Thousands of cities, towns, and states across the United States are facing the most acute labor shortage in recent memory. Regional governments have an even tougher time than businesses because they can't compete with private sector wages, can barely offer remote work, and have faced a larger wave of early retirements during the pandemic. Here's another one from Yahoo, again in the finance section. Some of the largest U.S. food distributors are reporting difficulties in fulfilling orders as a lack of workers weigh on the supply chain. And then maybe one more. I love this one. Back in the spring, McDonald's offered $50 for potential employees just to show up for an interview. Now, you might say, why is this happening? Well, I think you know why it's happening. We've talked about this on the program before. When you pay people not to work, guess what? People don't work. And of course, there may be some fear of COVID-19 and the rest. But when you actually can, and we've run the numbers on this program before, make more by sitting home on your couch than you can by going to work, you can understand why rational individuals may be worried about getting a disease or just simply not interested in getting up and getting dressed and getting in a car, going on the bus and going to work, might choose staying at home as a better option. By the way, lest you think that it's only due to non-Christians, let's be fair, because Jerry Newcomb also says that even Chick-fil-A, a company built on Christian work ethic, has had some problems staffing recently. At least 2 Alabama outlets had to close because they did not have enough staff for Chick-fil-A restaurants there. And while restaurants across the country, according to Fox 5 in New York, have reopened their dining rooms after closing them during the pandemic, a new problem has surfaced. Many businesses have reported having issues with staffing and are struggling to hire enough workers to meet the customers' demands. I've walked into many restaurants where there are a lot of tables that just aren't even being surfaced, don't even have silverware on them because they actually only have enough staff to actually be able to feed and to service half of the people in the restaurant. Again, why is this happening? Well, this is due to the fact that when we have extended these unemployment benefits for so long, then as a result, individuals have made the assumption, based upon reasonable calculation, that they can make more actually staying at home. So as a result, 15 different states actually did stop providing these unemployment benefits. And what happened next? They were sued. There are now, as a class action suit that actually is suing those states to force them to renew those benefits again. And of course, now that the federal unemployment benefits have, quote, expired, although they continue in some of the states where we broadcast, there's already talk of instating them once again. We need a resurgence of the work ethic, and of course that resurgence of the work ethic comes from a resurgence, I would believe, of Christianity. And so I agree with my good friend Jerry Newcomb. America, it's time to go back to work. Anyway, let's take a break, and tomorrow we are going to be talking with Alex Kendrick. He is not only an individual that has produced so many great films, but will be in studio talking about this new film, Show Me the Father, which my wife has been raving about. She's had a chance to see it at the National Religious Broadcasters. I have not, but we'll be talking about that with him. And then we will also have our good friends, Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter, talking about some of those issues. I know Kelly wants to talk about 2 Alaska airline employees that were fired because they had a difference of opinion with the airline. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.